Ragdoll origins, an outright creepy villain that needs to be explored more. They all have differences in the ways they express themselves, but everyone, from filmmakers to novelists, and even 2-year-old children, agree that dolls are, for some reason, extremely creepy. Hollywood has a long tradition of using what is, in many cases, a child's best friend to evoke such visceral terror that you can't help but become paralyzed by its grip. It started in 1936, when one of the forefathers of horror cinema, Tod Browning, created the Devil doll alongside Lionel Barrymore, the grandfather of the greatest cold open scream queen of all time, Drew Barrymore. It was the catalyst behind the wave of doll-based horror flicks that have been the leading cause behind several bedwetting tales for children growing up in the 90s. But while Chucky has been able to carve out a multi-million-dollar empire for himself with his evil grin, DC managed to make one of the only dolls that were non-threatening to a child, a downright psychopath. The Ragdoll has existed since the early 17th century and was the primary mode of entertainment for American children until baseball was invented. James Robinson and Gardner Fox took this childhood staple and turned it into one of the creepiest villains that DC has ever seen. The Ragdoll debuted in Flash Comics issue number 36 in 1942 and has gone on to become one of the most bizarre Flash villains to ever exist, and that includes Gorilla Grodd. Let's break down why he does what he does. This is Ragdoll's creepy origins, explored. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. What created the Ragdoll? His disturbing backstory. Today, we have so many options that we tend to think of circuses as nothing more than a violation of human and animal rights. It seems almost primitive to think that not a century ago, a tiger jumping through a flaming hoop was considered to be the height of entertainment. But no matter what you think of such acts, you gotta agree with us when we say that the freakiest circus attraction is one that involves no equipment. Contortionism, a practice that originated in ancient China. Some form of contortionism has been practiced since as early as 1045 BCE. Yes, contortionism is older than the Son of God himself. It's fascinating to think that a discipline this ancient is thriving even today. People might not pay you to watch your pet elephant ride a unicycle, but they will empty out their wallets to see you turn into a human donut. Perhaps that's the mindset that a young Peter Merkel had when he first joined the circus. Peter was born into the business. His father was a barker who would shout himself hoarse, trying to hype up the sideshow for the circus goers while spending weeks on end starving. In an effort to help support his family and make a name for himself, Peter decided to put his natural gifts to use. While most human beings, and contortionists by extension, possess double-jointed limbs, Peter Merkel was born with the rare condition of triple-jointedness. His rare physiology granted him extraordinary flexibility and elasticity, allowing Peter to bend his body whichever way he wished. Using this ability, he was able to become a top act in the carnival he joined as a youth. But when the carnival fell on hard times, Peter Merkel became despondent. He had spent his entire life in poverty and infamy, being ridiculed for his affliction and having nothing to his name. Now that he'd finally made a name for himself, everything that defined who he was, it was taken away from him, wandering the streets penniless. Merkel despaired of ever having money and a decent life when he chanced upon a scene that would change his entire life. He crossed a departmental store and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw what they were loading it up with: boxes upon boxes of life-sized ragdolls. Driven by desperation as much as madness, Peter Merkel decided that he would rob the store by blending in and becoming his namesake, a ragdoll. His logic was unassailable, to be sure. At a time where superheroes were fighting costume villains, no one would even think to look for a literal crime-committing ragdoll. Indeed, this turned out to be the case, as the Ragdoll had been active for many years and even carved a name out for himself before arriving in Keystone City. It was here that he would first go up against Jay Garrick, earning him the eternal enmity of the ultimate contortionist. Ragdoll would face off against various iterations of the Flash over the decades. He has worked alongside Thinker to bring down both Jay Garrick and Barry Allen, and was a part of the Ultra-Humanite-led secret society of supervillains during the Targets of Two Worlds storyline that saw both the JLA and JSA get banished to the Limbo dimension. Ragdoll was able to fulfill his mission with uncanny ease, luring the Flash into a freight ship's hold that was primed with an explosive set to go off as soon as the speedster arrived. It knocked the Flash completely out of commission and solidified Ragdoll as an insane genius. When his metahuman physiology started giving up on him, an elderly Ragdoll began ranting on the streets of Opal City, babbling on about fate, injustice, and worst of all, pain. His ramblings attracted the city's disenfranchised to his distorted cause, putting an army at his back. Peter's hypnotic sermons effectively brainwashed his listeners into becoming eager and willing members of his cult. Brandishing his newfound leash, Peter whipped his cult into making Opal City's streets run red. It took all the power from Starman's cosmic rod to put an end to the rampage that had been unleashed by the mad contortionist. His son is somehow creepier than him. The original Ragdoll was a Golden Age Flash villain who was blessed with the clear power of being triple-jointed. But while Ragdoll 1's membership into every secret group of supervillains was contingent on his unique physiology, his son would have to put himself through literal hell to get to that level. And even then, he's mostly treated like comic relief. Debuting in Villains United issue number 1, Ragdoll 2's real name is Peter Merkel Jr. Being born to the cult leader and contortionist extraordinaire that was Ragdoll, young Peter was expected to follow in his footsteps. Sadly, genetics failed the boy, as he was born without the triple-jointedness that made Peter Merkel Sr. such a great thief. He faced great abuse as a child because of this, being shunned and mistreated by both his father and brother. The only solace he would ever find was with his sister, who, despite being his confidant and implied lover, would ultimately betray him as well. Determined to live up to the family legacy, Peter Merkel Jr. subjected his own body to hundreds of surgeries over the course of 12 years in an effort to replicate his father's powers. While it gave him the flexibility he so desired, it also completely shattered any vestiges of sanity left within him. His surgeries replaced his joints with self-lubricating and fully rotating implants, which gave him contorting capabilities that far exceeded his father's. Additionally, his body also became nearly indestructible thanks to the modifications it went through. Donning a costume that closely resembled his father's, he joined Gail Simone in Dale Eaglesham's reimagined Secret Six, and later went on to side with Joker in his DC-wide supervillain war. Unlike his predecessor, whose cruelty is measured as opposed to impulsive, Ragdoll II is insanity in a unitard and will shove you off a bridge if you dare question him. Just ask the Mad Hatter. Ragdoll II serves mostly as the residential wisecrack of the Secret Six and takes immense pride in being the craziest out of a bunch of lunatics. But when you take that assumed air of comedy away from him, he is easily one of the creepiest, most tortured characters to ever exist in DC's continuity, and that includes the Joker. The Flash somehow managed to make Ragdoll even worse. Even though he was eliminated during the judge's cut, America's Got Talent Season 13 contestant Troy James has created quite a name for himself by becoming Hollywood's go-to contortionist. His first few appearances were sparse, playing mongrels for The Strain and Pretzel Jack in the surrealist anthology Channel Zero. James was also a part of the 2019 Hellboy film, where he played the malicious spirit Baba Yaga. But his biggest mainstream break till date has to be a part of CW's The Flash. Debuting in the Season 5 episode, All Dolled Up, James brought an air of unsettling reality to Ragdoll that couldn't quite be conveyed on the pages of a comic book. Seeing a picture of a folded up gentleman passing through a water pipe isn't quite as chilling as watching it happen in front of your eyes. This version of Peter Merkel is a disillusioned African-American youth. Peter has grown up misguided even after his mother Teresa did everything she could to provide for him. Their relationship went from strained to estranged when Peter tried to break into his mother's house and was caught red-handed. A dejected and directionless Peter would be crushed, broken, and snapped on the night of the Enlightenment, when a piece of the Star Labs satellite gave him the power to contort his body to inhuman degrees without feeling any pain. And when he found out his mother had passed away, Peter Merkel decided to use his newfound powers to make the world feel the pain that he now carried with himself. He took on the persona of Ragdoll and has managed to put the literal fear of God in Grant Gustin's Barry Allen in each of his appearances. Unlike his comic book counterparts, whose costumes reflect the Ragdoll's circus-linked origins, Troy James manages to make the character come off as a genuine menace, dressed in a two-piece suit with orange dreadlocks. The most distinctive feature of this Ragdoll is the fact that you can tell precisely nothing about what he's thinking or going to do, thanks to his Jigsaw-inspired porcelain mask. The expressionless mask makes him look less like a contortionist and more like a demon-infested version of elongated man who has a nasty kink for sadomasochism. Though he appears to lament his actions when Barry finally defeats him, we'll never know for sure. What we can tell you with complete certainty is that beating Troy James's demented portrayal of one of the most iconic Golden Age Flash villains is not going to be topped easily, and that's mostly thanks to James's ungodly flexibility. Why Ragdoll deserves more attention. Despite having a premise so comical that it even spawned an imposter arc during the events of Starman 80-page Giant issue number 1, Ragdoll is one of those rare D-list characters who got the full 180 treatment. Thanks to the many reboots and revisions that DC's continuity has gone through, Ragdoll went from a doll maker ripoff to an Arkham Asylum detainee. And if that isn't a glow-up for a criminal in comics, we don't know what is. As the years have progressed, so has Ragdoll's character development. He went from being a circus freak turned criminal to a man so unstable that even Harley Quinn and the Mad Hatter wouldn't want to trust him. Though that probably has something to do with Ragdoll trying to kill them to prove he's the craziest prick alive on planet Earth. Peter Merkel Sr.'s reformed appearance as a hypnotic cult leader in the 90s was exactly the kind of jolt that Ragdoll's character needed, and thanks to the New 52, his legacy will always live on through his children, Peter Merkel Jr. and his equally scatterbrained sister, Jr. Details of his abusive, controlling, and feral nature are commonplace amongst the destitute residents of Opal City, and yet he himself remains an enigma, shrouded in mystery, with no clear motivations or points of origin ever being revealed to us. Even though we know everything about Ragdoll's modus operandi, we're still figuring him out, and that intrigue is what makes him such a compelling bad guy. So the next time you visit Walmart, just make sure to steer clear of the toys section, even if you don't suffer from pediophobia. You never know which one of those life-sized Ragdolls is following you with its inanimate eyes. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.